everybody, and
Morning.
thanks for wanting to hear my story, however mundane it is. It all started in October 1971,
Wow.
when I entered UST, now KNUST, as part of the cohort of 97 young men chosen to study engineering and graduating in 1975. Those were brutal days. Out of the 97 that started, only about 37 of us graduated, and 6 were picked along the way. So the original 97, out of the original 97, only 31 actually graduated. But going back to school, I know I was not very studious. My studies were blended with some social life. I played sport, in particular table tennis for the university, for which I was a team captain for about a year or two. I don't quite remember, but I know I was captain at least for 1 year. And I also played for Unity Hall. There were also other sports for Unity Hall, field hockey. Yes, mainly field hockey. And I remember once I participated in playing against Africa Hall. And a colleague at GHA showed me a picture of me standing there against the wind. But I was substituted because I had forgotten that we were playing with women. After about 30 minutes. I was also elected as the Unity Hall JCR chairman in my second year. And in my third year, I was elected as editor of the faculty students magazine, The Engineer, which had not been produced for a long time, but we managed to put an edition together. The lessons that I learned at my time at KNUST was that discipline and hard work were necessary for a successful career as an engineer, and it never left me. So immediately after graduation, I applied and was accepted at the Ghana Highway Authority as an assistant engineer.
Which year?
That was in 1975.
1975.
Yeah, in June 1975, I applied. I actually started working for Steelworks, my Steelworks with Dr. Sam. And I realized that that's not where my future lay. So one afternoon, I came to GHA. Eddie Francois was the chief executive, and I went to see him that I wanted a job. And Mr. Francois sent me to Mr. Addo. And in Mr. Addo's office, I asked for a sheet of paper. He said, go and write an application. I said, sir, can I get a sheet of paper from your office, your secretary? He says, okay. And in his auntie office, I started, I wrote my application. And then he also directed me to Mr. Ofori, who was then the deputy chief executive. And within 3 hours, I had a job. I was posted to Kumasi, the Kumasi Sunyani and Kumasi Offenso Abofo road projects as an assistant engineer under Mr. A.K. Hammond, who was then the RE. Mr. J.U. Addo was the regional highway engineer. But, a lot of interesting things happened. It gave me an idea of what I was to face in my career as an engineer. There was a very powerful chief in Kumasi who was a contractor for the Kumasi Offenso project. And I had gone in there and I saw that the embankments they were building were not being compacted properly. So I wrote in my engineer's handbook, and it became a big issue. I was hauled before my superiors, but I defended myself and said, look, this is the work which is being done, and it's not being done properly. So that was my first brush with strong.
The power that be.
Yes, and it didn't end there. I can tell you it did not end there. So when the national service postings came, I had been posted to the Kumasi office of the AESC, now AESL, as a structural engineer. I was not happy, but I embraced it. And during the year that I spent there, I was involved in the structural design and supervision of a number of schools and other public and private projects. As a joke, my bosses really used me, but I learned a lot. And I never complained, and kept a good relationship with my bosses. And then in August 1976, I received a Canadian Commonwealth Scholarship through a competitive selection by the Scholarship Secretariat in Accra here in Ghana. I initially studied for the MSc, but I was given the condition that if I could complete my MSc, research MSc in 15 months, I will receive further sponsorship to do the PhD. It was a big challenge. It was normally the average period for a research master's was about 2 years. And I took on the challenge. Some days were some of the most miserable days of my life. I can say I know in North America you have to take for the research master 6 courses and then do your research. And my professor, the right professor was Paul Gaskin. Paul wanted to be smart, so he says, "Fred, you know what? There's a condition that you can register a parallel PhD while you're doing your MSc, but you can only do that for 1 semester. If you're not able to complete by December 1977, you lose the chance to get your master's. And for the PhD, I needed to do additional 4 courses. I took on operational research as one of the, apart from the civil engineering courses. And then I also took one in mechanical engineering. And the workload, especially for operational, whatever, was so much that one morning I walked to Paul's office and I said, "Paul, I want to stop the PhD." And Paul was not pleased. He just looked at me and said, "Fred, after all the hard work we've gone through, writing to the Commonwealth Secretariat in Ottawa, getting the university to accept this is not usually done." I told him, "This is the best decision I have taken in my life up till now." And he says, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Look, let me finish my MSc. And if I can finish by December, I will go on and do the PhD. But if I do not finish my MSc and then I do also not get my PhD, what do I have? So please, Paul, I accept my decision." Of course, he did it reluctantly, but then it motivated me. And in December 1977, I submitted my thesis around the 15th of December, meeting the deadline that I had been given. In January 1978, I successfully defended my MSc thesis and went on to do my PhD. I started my PhD, but I didn't know whether I wanted to continue or not. So I decided to come home. I had, at that time, the Public Service Commission used to do a foreign recruitment. So they come to Canada. I met them. I written to them that I wanted to work in the rural sector. And they've said, "Oh, yes, Ghana Health Authority." And I told them that I actually spent some time with the GHA in 1975. So they agreed for me to come down. I came down and reported to Ghana Highway Authority. But there's something very interesting happened. I was posted to planning, and Mr. Papo, Harry Papo, was then the director of planning. I went to meet him, and he gave me an office. And one day he came to my office and had a chat with me. What are your aspirations? And I told him I started my PhD, but I wasn't. I'm not too sure if I wanted to pursue that at that particular moment. He told me, "Young man, Ghana, at that time, the economy had started declining. It's a bit difficult in Ghana. You didn't bring a car, you didn't bring any of the household items. I will advise you to go back and complete your PhD. Maybe things would have changed by then. And you can always come back." When I was being interviewed for promotion to chief engineer, I mentioned this to him and he was horrified. He didn't remember. And I said, "This happened in 1978 in June." And we laughed it over. So I completed my MSc in January 1978 and went on to complete my PhD in geotechnical and transportation engineering in January 1981. At Queen's, I carried out research under the Canadian Institute of Guided Ground Transport. The civil engineering aspects of this was housed in the Department of Civil Engineering. This was at the time when the development of fast trains were in focus, levitation and everything. The team at the Queen's Civil studied the behavior of soils and ballast under dynamic loading. This was to help develop new scientifically based methods of pavement design as an improvement on the empirical methods that existed. By the time I completed my PhD, my professors and I had published two papers in the Canadian Geotechnical Journal and one in the Proceedings of the 1979 Canadian Geotechnical Conference. While at Queen's, I also had the privilege of teaching undergraduate students strength of materials, soil mechanics, and asphalt technology. I also guided new graduate students in setting up their laboratory work. These were not for free, though. I got paid handsomely. I think I was paid $25 an hour then, which was a lot of money then, and it did help a lot. Queen's instilled in me the love for research and a questioning mind, which I found useful in my professional growth. So I finally joined GHA in February 1981. After a period of scheming, the then head of materials, an Indian expatriate, he was called Sen. I think I had been penciled in to be the action chief engineer materials, and he started scheming. But it went on for a while. Eventually, I was appointed as the acting chief of materials. At the materials division, I've met a lot of challenges. I mean, there were quite a few challenges. There were no engineers. I only had one assistant engineer in the person of Addo, who had just finished his national service. And then there was one national service personnel, Mr. Angwa, who stayed with GHA for until his retirement. Apart from equipment for routine soil testing, there were no setups to allow the division to function as would be expected of the materials division of a highway authority. Some equipment had been ordered a few years previously, and these remained in boxes. There were no operational vehicles. I think there was only one 404 pickup that was working in the division. All the vehicles assigned to the division had been packed at the workshop, including the official vehicle for the chief engineer, which was GV7631. I remember that very fondly. And they had been packed many years. So some of the things I did was, first of all, to make sure that we were mobile. So I went, talked to the mechanical people, found out how we could get some of these vehicles operational. And you won't believe it, but sometimes I even had to buy them the parts. Later on, I got my money back. But one thing I remember I did was that at some point I went in there, they said they didn't have some tools to work on some of these vehicles. I went and bought a set of tools and gave it to one of the workshop superintendents. So eventually we started getting the vehicles, we got mobile and we got active. And crucially, the work of the division did not appear to be integrated into the working of the organization because there was no effective leadership, I would say now in hindsight. The materials division have been balkanized and the work that we were supposed to do has been spread over various other divisions. Gradually, with the help of some dedicated staff, we set up the box equipment and gradually set out to build a division capable of supporting the mandate of the authority. Gradually, the division grew and began to play its expected role in the management of the highway network. As the division grew, you would have thought that everybody would be happy, but I learned sadly that this was not so. However, I learned to run around obstacles and standing one's ground while necessary without being insulting or disrespectful. The big disadvantage was that I was very young. I think when I joined GHA as the head of the materials, I was only 29. And no, in a country like Ghana, sometimes people like to use your youth against you. And I remember I used to joke at meetings, at management meetings, that I will not let anybody bully me on account of my youth. As a joke, I don't know how it was taken. So I learned a lot, running around obstacles and also standing your ground and knowing how to interact with people, even if they didn't like it. Eventually, materials grew slowly, and we tried to build a formidable division. While at the materials division, I also provide that official consultancy to the Ghana Civil Aviation and the Ghana Air Force on their runways, the maintenance of their runways, design of extensions, which I involved some of my staff in. The love for research, which I had acquired at Queen's, never left me, and I continued to publish mainly in conference proceedings. On the average, I had a paper out once every other year. Some of the papers were well received and continue to be quoted. Sometimes I'm encouraged when I see that things I've written about 40 years ago are being quoted. Some of the challenging but interesting projects I worked on beyond the routine work that we did, testing, making sure compaction was done properly, went beyond that and did quite a bit of some interesting work. The asphalt design for the Axim and Pataba Elubo Road project. This has caused a lot of problem. And large parts of that road was on peat, and settlement was still going on. So you needed to have an asphalt layer which was flexible, will deform as the settlement of embankments and went on, while at the same time would not crack. It was very challenging, but we managed to nail it. There was also the rehabilitation of field embankments using bamboo and sawdust on the same road. They built embankments and overnight the total embankment collapsed, cutting the road off and in sections. And we set out to rebuild the embankments to make them stay. And we used bamboo as reinforcement, sawdust, and built on these, and the embankments are still standing. In fact, in 2002, I presented a paper on Malaysia using that as a case study. Then one morning we woke up and the Cape Coast Road, the Cape Coast Elmina Road, part of it had been washed and away. So the materials division was called in, and we managed to advise on the rehabilitation. And when you pass on the road now, you don't see anything. And I remember Professor Kimbolo, who was then a director in the ministry, one day asking me, "How did you guys do it?" And I said, "That's our job." As a joke, I said, "That's our job." But it was interesting and challenging. Then one of the most interesting projects was also the design and supervision of the Keta Lagoon crossing, a road on extremely soft marine deposit. If you dropped a stone from your shoulder, the stone just vanished. And we did design the embankment and it was built. We monitored pore pressures, we monitored settlements. And the most interesting thing is that the settlements that we measured were just around about 95%. Well, we monitored them at a number of places. And all the settlements were between 90 and 105% of the actual measured. Our prediction was between 90 and 105% of the actual measured values. Other interesting projects outside of the GHA were the perimeter security upgrade for the US ambassador and the Marines residences in Accra. Well, I was in my office when I was called to meet some important person in the embassy, and they said, "Look, we need to upgrade the perimeter fences and for our ambassador and then the Marine residences, and it required a lot of geotechnical work, and we're told you may be able to help." So I accepted and did it for them. They didn't complain, so I presume they were happy. This was a time when terrorist attacks on U.S. interests around the world was rising. But it was a very interesting experience. Just a second. I'm trying to. Yeah. Yeah. Then there was also the geotechnical design for the installation of dolphins at the Akosombo port, which I was also involved in. They were building a port at the Akosombo port, and I got invited to lend my little knowledge on the design and the installation of the dolphins, which would be used by the seafaring crafts for berthing. The period at the materials division taught me patience, perseverance, tolerance, and hard work, which would become invaluable in the later years of my career as I grew. Then, in and around April 1989, there was a substantial completion takeover of a section of the Enyenam-Konongo-Kumasi Road project. I usually, as a head of materials, did not participate in these handing over and taking over. But I was specifically invited for that day because apparently a section of the road near Ejiso appeared to have a high groundwater level, and they wanted my opinion. I went in and gave my opinion. I came back to Accra. However, days after this event, my appointment and that of Mr. A.K. Hammond, who was on the chief engineer contracts, were terminated by a ministerial instruction. And that's why I tell you that the problems I had when I was working on the Kumasi Offensive and Kumasi Union Road were the precursor of some of the problems I would face in my career. So, well, this is what happened. In spite of this, I tried to ply my trade in the country of my birth, which I love so much, but I couldn't. Anybody who was suspected to provide me any opportunity for work was one that they jeopardized their relationship with the ministry. It was a difficult time. I accepted my fate. In time, I had an offer to work in Liberia on some tailing dams project as a materials engineer. But I can tell you the work was so mundane and so basic that I was bored most of the time. And I had to devise ways and means to make my work interesting. Otherwise, I would have gone mad. After 6 months, Charles Taylor's rebels took over our camp. I was at a Bonman's camp, and after 6 arduous days under siege, we were evacuated by the German Air Force, since they had the largest number of expatriates among the 270 expatriate community and their families. It was a very difficult period. But I returned to Ghana in June 1990 and tried to set up a consulting business, but I was not professionally. I got a few jobs here and there, but I was not professionally fulfilled. Luckily, I secured a job in Botswana. However, days before I left the country, I was invited to a meeting with the then acting Minister for Roads and Highways, Major Sam. So to cut a long story short, in December of 1990, I found myself back at GHA. To the disappointment of my prospective employers in Botswana and their UK principal. I was a UK company that wanted to employ me, and they wanted to send me to Botswana. But I explained to them that I couldn't fight my government and that I loved my country. And as a first choice, I'd like to work in my country. So while I continued to work in my capacity as the chief engineer at Materials, in January 1992, a cataclysmic event occurred within GHA. After a push, I say a push because apparently talking to my senior members who were affected, they said that the press conference was not even their own desire, but they were pushed to have a press conference on the Accra-Tema motorway after some trees has been cleared for some maintenance works. The chief executive, 2 deputy chief executives, and the chief legal officer were dismissed. So after interviews and a period of uncertainty, I was eventually appointed as the deputy chief executive development. At development, I initially oversaw the contracts, planning, materials, bridges, and 7 design divisions. There were 5 divisions. After studying the way things were moving, I tried to streamline project and contract management. Project and contract management were divided over, I think, 2 divisions. Planning was taking care of all foreign funded projects, while contracts that only locally funded projects. I thought that we were not maximizing our experience. So I reorganized the way we manage the projects, and also eventually have a project management manual developed with assistance from JICA. I hope that they're still being used. I also made proposals for setting up a safety and environment division within the development department, which was eventually accepted. That's why you have the safety and environment. They were becoming important, and we could not continue to have it amorphous in various divisions. So we also helped develop I helped develop the pavement management system for Ghana Highway Authority, which I believe is still in place. So we continued to make progress until the end of February 2001, after the new government had taken over, when I find myself jobless again. Proceed on leave, and proceed I did. Sometimes I joke that I still don't know whether I'm on leave or not. But well, I did proceed on leave. After being forced out of GHA again, I was fortunate enough to continue to grow my career by getting opportunities to work on some interesting projects. Among the projects was the earthquake study of Snes Donkuna site, where West Hills Mall is now built. Our friends also directed adverts for employment for which they thought I was qualified to me. Almost all of them were outside Ghana. I did apply to some. I selected those I wanted to apply to. In 2002, after an international advertisement, followed by interviews, I was appointed in March 2003 as Chief Executive Officer of the Tanzania National Roads Agency.
So, Doc,
yes, sir.
so you were fired 3 times from GHA?
Oh, by Second World War. I call them my world wars.
Wow, please continue.
Yeah, yeah. But just before I had gone to Tanzania, I had also applied for a job at the ADB, and I was appointed as a consultant transport engineer. I stayed there for a few months, and then the insurrection in Abidjan and in Ivory Coast erupted again, and the office in Abidjan was closed, and we were supposed to move to Tunis. While preparing to move to Tunis, I got a call from Tanzania that I should come for discussions. So I went for discussions, and by the end of February 2003, I had been appointed as Chief Executive of the Tanzania National Roads Agency. Then I had to resign my AFDB post. TANROADS was created and began operations in 2001. I was not the first chief executive. The setup of the organization was supported by the Norwegian government. So they brought a Norwegian chief executive, and he stayed there for 2 years. And after 2 years, I think there were a lot of issues that I will not, this is not a time to talk about. So the government decided, yes, thank you, you helped set it up, this up for us, but we want to look wider. It was a very competitive election handled by Price Waterhouse, and I got a job. And at the time of my assumption of duty, there were quite a number of problems.
Which year, please, Doc?
2003.
2003.
Yeah. At the time of my assumption of duty, there were quite a number of problems. The World Bank has canceled $70 million out of a grant of 170 million because of slow progress. About 50% of the road network was in bad condition. And the sad thing was that out of the 35,000 kilometers, only about 4,000 were paved. So there were times I sat in my office and I said, this is a daunting a job, but well, you don't run in the face of a war. I had accepted to fight the war, so I had to think hard. The pavement management system which they had and which was not being used because it was too complicated. So we set out to get a more user-friendly pavement pavement management system, and we insisted that all that we had. Then I think 21 regions. Now I think they've increased the number of regions to I think 24 or so after I left. And we made sure that they had enough equipment, and every quarter they had to submit returns so that we could identify areas where we had problems and make sure that we pushed money in there. I also made a spirited, push for lengthening the paved network, which I think eventually was accepted. And most of our projects were delayed. There were no systems for incentivizing contractors to finish their projects. Sometimes they stayed on and on and on. And we had to take a different approach. I took a difficult approach. If you didn't finish your work and the problems were yours, we will charge you liquidated damages. I remember one Japanese contractor saying, we've been working in Tanzania for 23 years. Nobody has ever mentioned even liquidated damages. I said, well, it's a new regime and you have to comply. You know, we had to take, but in a friendly way. It was not done harshly. We will let them understand where we're also coming from. And eventually, within 2 years after I've been there, almost all these old projects have been completed, and we were on the mend. We had got more support from the Danish government, also support from the Norwegian government, the World Bank, AFDB, and we were moving. And I was so happy when there was a meeting of the World Bank and the AFDB in Tanzania. So I was in my office where I was invited to meet Wolfenson, the president of the World Bank, and also Omar Kabaj. I was amazed. I said, what's going on? Excuse me?
Who is Omar Kabaj?
Omar Kabaj was the AFDB president then.
Okay.
So I went in there, had a chat with them, and they said, look, how have you done this? Because we have been following what was going on. And I said, nothing strange. And they said they wanted to, replicate it in other African countries. And I told them, sir, there's no magic. Just follow the contract documents and make sure that the staff are motivated and they know what they have to do. I have a picture in my files with Wolfenson, which was sent to me from the World Bank office in Tanzania. So that was, then we saw that we had begun to make, some progress. But, you don't stop. We negotiated new loans and grants without cumbersome preconditions. After I tried to get documentation to see what the preconditions were doing to some of these projects. Some of these projects were not taken off as expected because, the government has to provide so much and they wouldn't. And then the projects, even starting the project became difficult and it created a whole lot. So I looked at historically and what has made it possible, difficult for projects to be completed on time and to be completed effectively. So send this out to the donor community, pushed, and eventually they accepted some of these, and we negotiated most of our new loans and grants without cumbersome preconditions, which I believed have led to the slow, what do you call it, slow progress of most projects. So by early 2007, when I was preparing to leave Tanzania, over 86% of the network was in good or fair condition. The paved road network had also increased from about 4,500 to just under 10,000. And we had a lot of projects in the pipeline to try and push this. We reinforced procurement and ensured that procurement processes were in line with projected timelines. We set a timeline from a project, and we will make sure that everybody did what he had to do. And it was quite beautiful. So what was the result after 4 years? TANROADS was adjudged as the least corrupt public agency by the Corruption Prevention Bureau of Tanzania. We also adjudged as the most procurement compliant, among the most procurement compliant agencies by the PPRA, as a public procurement regulatory agency. We received editorial commentaries from local and regional news as far as Kenya and other places, indicating the miracle in, as they call the miracle in Tanzania. And I'll tell you an interesting story. I once went for a conference in Mombasa, and I had to come back to Dar earlier. So I took a taxi to go to the airport, and I sat in the taxi, and he says, oh, he's recently been taking tourists to Tanzania. And a few years ago, the roads were so bad. If you got an assignment to go to Tanzania, you were crying. But recently, he'd taken a few trips, and he sees that there's been a dramatic improvement. But I didn't identify myself as working for TANROADS. So we had a chat, and I was elated. I thought even if ordinary people were then beginning to see what we had done, then maybe we were doing something right. And then the World Bank also carried out a study in sub-Saharan road administrations, and we were adjudged as the best, adjudged as the best performing road agency in the region. And then my wife and I received a presidential invitation for a private dinner, at which the then outgoing president, the elections had just been finished, and he had done his 8 years. That was President Nkapa. So got an invitation that my wife and I should come for a private dinner, and I went in there. There were about 10 of his advisors. We had dinner, and I was wondering what was it that the president was wanted to see me. So after eating, which I didn't enjoy very much because I was anticipating what would be the problem, and putting on my...
Maybe they're going to fire you.
Well, in Tanzania, I used to say, if anybody, I said, look, I'm here, I brought 2 bags. I have been fired so many times in my life that
you are not afraid of firing.
Oh, and I used to say that if you're a chief executive and you're also afraid of being fired, then you can never have any meaningful change. So they knew my stand, but nevertheless, it can still happen. So after eating, I said, which I was thinking in my mind, the president says, no, now, yeah, you don't know why I invited this, he told his advisors, you don't know why I invited this young man here for dinner. When I was campaigning for my, my re-election, I went over roads, and some of them were horrible. Some took 9 hours to get there. The people were asking for better roads and better roads. And now I have campaigned for Jakaya Kikwete, who would take over from me. And I've been to these places, and the roads that took 12 hours now take about 3 hours. And I'm personally impressed. And now everybody is praising the road sector as one of the biggest legacies I'm leaving. And I wanted to thank this a young man for what he has done in my country. And I said, sir, I didn't bring any staff from Ghana. I didn't bring any money. And he says, don't be modest, leadership. I said, well, I didn't see what I did. I use your people and I use your money. But thank you for recognizing this. And it was a beautiful evening, I must admit. It's not always that public servants get to hear these things. And the beautiful thing is that anytime President Nkapa came to Ghana, and he came for the UNTAC meeting, and then there was also a couple of other private meetings. He would also insist that I had lunch with him and the wife and my wife. Sadly, he passed away in 2021. So in June, actually in February 2007, I indicated that when my current contract ended, I would not be seeking for reappointment. When you build a system, people think it's been easy. So there were talks about why do we have to take somebody? Sometimes, somebody will write a comment. Why do we need a foreigner to come and look after our roofs or whatever? Don't we have engineers? And I was beginning to sense that it was time to move on. So I did indicate that I was not going to seek a reappointment. So I returned to Ghana in June 2007. And Chumbo Afo and Partners contacted me if I would like to work for them. And I said, why not? So they appointed me as a managing director of Chumbo Afo and Partners, which I held for 3 years. And then I was invited to head a Rwanda Transport Development Agency. I was in Switzerland for one of the international meetings that I used to participate in, and then I got a call from the Minister for Infrastructure in Rwanda and says, we want you to be part of our development. And I didn't know much about Rwanda. All I knew was the genocide, but then I said, it would be a pleasure. So he says, come over. And I said, no, I'm in Switzerland. So, but I have to pass home and get a permission from my boss. He says, do you have a boss? Who is your boss? And I said, of course, my landlord. And he laughed. So by the time I got to Accra by the weekend, I had an invitation with tickets for my wife and myself to come to Rwanda for discussions. We went there for a week. They treated us very nicely. And after a week, I asked my wife, do you want to stay here? And he says, yes. So here we found ourselves. I resigned from Chumbo Afo, and we found ourselves in June 2010 in Rwanda. Rwanda had a very peculiar case. Because of the genocide, most of the people that I had working with were very young. Most of them had 6 years or less in experience. But what happens is that when people have assumed positions at early ages in their careers, there's a tendency for them to be arrogant. But I had to find a way to tame them all. But my mandate was that I should get the organization operational because they tried so many times. They've also brought in some experts from, Denmark? They brought an expert from Zambia, and still they were tottering. So I took on the challenge. But while at Chumbo Afo and Partners, I accepted an invitation from SMEC of Australia to lead a team to help establish the Lesotho National Road Authority and to develop a system for managing rural roads under a decentralized administrative system, which I worked with a team of engineers from Australia, from the UK, and then a local government expert from Zimbabwe. After 2 months, we've been able to deliver a mandate, and we left it to them. They had then started recruiting the chief executive and the staff, and then we said goodbye, and I left. So coming back to Rwanda Transport Development Agency. Rwanda Development Agency looked after the development of airports, the development of waterways, the development of railways, and then, of course, the roads. But the roads were the most prominent at that point in time. So I restructured the organization, set up systems which were lacking, and after 6 months, the organization had been transformed and was operational. I oversaw the agency for another 6 months, after which I was offered then again, they wanted the national to be chief executive. I said I didn't have a problem. So they offered me as a ministerial advisor. I looked at it initially, but then I declined and I said, thank you. And I left and yes, I left. But apart from managing the network and looking after the railway development and also the airport development, there were a number of projects of international significance which we were involved in. That was the Tanzania, Isaka in Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda Standard Gauge Rail Project, funded the studies and the development funded by the AFDB, but it's supposed to be put on PPP. And the new Bugesera International Airport, which is currently under construction and is expected to be completed soon, maybe before the end of the year. And Rwanda has a view of making that the hub, air travel hub in East Africa. So I returned to Ghana in July 2011, continued as an independent consultant. And during that period, I worked on a number of international and some local assignments, including AFDB's road quality study involving the audit of 30 AFDB funded projects in Tunisia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, DRC, Cameroon, Benin, and Ghana, and to make recommendations on ensuring better project outcomes and better management of the networks, which I produced with a couple of other engineers, one engineer, one other, a materials engineer, and an economist. Then there was also the restructuring of the Ministry of Transport, Infrastructure and Communications in Zanzibar. And this led to the creation of an autonomous transport sector institution, including ZAN Roads and ZAN Transport. Then I was also the team leader for the audit of the Awoshi-Pokuase Road project, which put me on collision course with the Department of Urban Roads because of the facts that I presented. But you know, we always deal with these things. In 2014, I was offered the job of a rector for CAF University, which I accepted. I oversaw the development of the university college over 3 years and made sure that we had a lot of visibility and realigned the number of courses, and especially in engineering and other departments or faculties. I resigned in 2017 to pursue other interests. Some of the projects I've had the opportunity to work on have included working with a team from MRH to develop a toll policy, which I'm told is still born. Then I was a geotechnical consultant for the JICA-funded Macquarie Interchange in Abidjan, which I think has been recently completed. I was the sole arbitrator for resolving a contractual dispute between Ghana Rubber Estates Limited and Electrofax, contractor for the final electricity upgrade project at Apiminim. And I also worked in Togo with JICA and a Japanese consultant for a year on developing a master plan for a Togo transport master plan, which is a very interesting project. And I've just completed an assignment as an international consultant for technical assistance towards the transformation of the materials testing and research division, the mechanical and transport division, and the Kenya Institute of Highways and Building Technology into semi-autonomous stroke autonomous government agency.